that under the UK's presidency, the group of the world's 7 most advanced economies, the G7, is launching a set of public policy principles for retail central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. Central bank digital currencies could be a digital version of money.
Digital cash could be programmed to ensure it is only spent on essentials or goods which an employer or government deems to be sensible. Holy shit.
So many of you have likely seen this clip from Joe Rogan's podcast where the guest Majid Nawaz outlines exactly why governments want to implement central bank digital currencies. One thing that Majid unfortunately hasn't realized in this clip is that central bank digital currencies already exist and are used in trillions of dollars worth of transactions a year. The digital currency I am talking about was previously managed by a private company until the company was bought by Blackrock. Blackrock intends to let the Federal Reserve control the digital currency as if it were a CBDC. The currency in question is already as programmable as Majid outlined and is entrenched as a fundamental part of digital finance. The digital currency I am talking about is called USDC and is issued by Circle, a company who is now controlled by Blackrock and soon the Federal Reserve. To explain how all of this has come about and how the Fed will control the CBDC, we need to briefly go back to 2017 where it all started. So in 2017, individual citizens would hold regular money, either in cash or in a bank account with a bank of their choosing. These banks would themselves have a bank account set up with a central bank of the country they're operating in. In theory, these central banks were separate to government and couldn't be influenced by politics. However, over the last few decades, the independence of these central banks has been gradually reducing as governments globally expand their control over financial systems. This can be seen in Turkey, where the government removes central bank officials if they don't follow the policies of the government. This has led to an inflation rate in the country's currency of 83%. While the previous banking system had many flaws, it did allow for people to have financial freedom with how they spend their money. 2 significant events happened in 2017 that would put central banks and governments on the course of trying to roll out a central bank digital currency, otherwise known as a CBDC. The first event was the popularity boom of digital currencies. This brought the realization that there are alternatives to the current financial system to millions of people across the world. The second event was Facebook beginning its development of its own digital currency called Libra. Although not officially announced until 2019, rumours and news of development had been swirling since 2017. All over the world, governments realised that a social media platform having peer-to-peer payment system would render regular currencies mostly obsolete. Naturally, governments shut down Libra with astonishing speed as a result. Central banks and governments realised the threat that these events presented to the financial system they control and started planning to release a digital currency of their own. These government digital currencies being planned would become the CBDCs we know today. These CBDCs will be fully controlled by the issuer, whether it be the government issuing, a central bank issuing, or a government-controlled third-party issuing. Now let's look at key characteristics of CBDCs that governments are looking to deploy. Firstly, the CBDCs will need to be entirely under the issuer's control. Secondly, their total supply must be controlled by the issuer. Thirdly, every transaction must be trackable by the government. Fourth, the issuer must have the ability to freeze, delete, or move funds at any time. And lastly, the issuer will ultimately be controlled by a country's government. Unfortunately, the USDC digital dollar has all of these characteristics and is about to be backed by the US Federal Reserve. As a result, USDC will become a de facto CBDC for the US, and that's not me saying that. CEO of Coinbase, Brian Armstrong, has shared the same sentiment. Also, if you think you're safe outside the US, you may need to reconsider, as USDC is used as the reserve currency globally for digital currencies. And on top of this, Circle has plans to launch a digital euro and digital Japanese yen. Let's briefly talk about Circle's background. This is where Blackrock enters the story. USDC is a stablecoin issued by Circle, a company incorporated in the US. Stablecoin, for those that don't know, is a digital asset that's value is pegged to something stable. In USDC's case, it's the US dollar. This value is achieved by each USDC coin being backed by real-world assets. The real-world assets in this case are either US dollars or US government debt known as US Treasury bonds. These Treasury bonds are considered to be a cash equivalent in the business world. They're an important detail in explaining all this, so we'll come back to them shortly. Firstly, let's start going through how USDC has all of the key characteristics of a CBDC. The first characteristic is already built into USDC, as Circle does outright control every individual dollar issued, even when the dollar is used on uncontrolled networks. This will be seen as we go through other characteristics. The second characteristic is also built in. USDC can only be created or deleted by Circle. No other party has access to this function. at least at present. The third characteristic is not built in, but as Circle operates on public ledger blockchains, every transaction involving USDC is trackable by default, and it's known that governments across the world are tracking blockchain activity. People have attempted to evade this tracking through transaction anonymizing services like Tornado Cash. This resulted in the US government placing sanctions on such services. These US sanctions prompted a lawsuit from CoinCenter about individuals' right to privacy. I'll keep an eye on this lawsuit, as whichever way it goes, it will likely be used as a precedent for the legalities of CBDCs in the future. Anyways, this leads to the fourth characteristic, which we have seen already implemented as part of the sanctions on Tornado Cash. In response to the sanctions, Circle froze all the USDC that was interacting with the Tornado Cash anonymizing service. And on a separate occasion in 2020, Circle froze $100,000 of USDC at the request of US law enforcement. No further details about these events have been disclosed since. Also in 2020, the CEO of Circle clarified in an interview that they can freeze USDC when they feel the need to, no matter where it is. So essentially yes, Circle can freeze USDC whenever it likes. This last characteristic is about to change due to upcoming events. These changes will be how the US government takes control of the biggest digital US currency in the world. You'll be shocked to know that this is where Blackrock enters the fray. These upcoming changes will impact Circle's cash reserve management. These are the reserves used as backing to create USDC dollars. A recent funding round by Circle was led by Blackrock, which resulted in Blackrock taking control of Circle's reserve assets. This was done by creating a dedicated fund and moving Circle's entire reserves into the fund. This fund is registered with the Securities and Exchange Commission, and it will be managed solely by Blackrock. Blackrock intends to make this fund a mechanism for stablecoins to have their supply controlled by the Federal Reserve. Explaining this is where everything starts to get a little complicated, but it's really important to understand this, as it's how the Federal Reserve will turn USDC into a CBDC. USDC's reserves are split with about 80% US Treasury bonds and 20% cash. Due to legal requirements, currently only the reserves US Treasury bonds can be put into the Blackrock fund, while the cash will have to be stored at regular banks. Blackrock's plan is to change the fund's legal status so it can hold cash reserves with the Federal Reserve instead of with regular banks. To do this, Blackrock is making the fund part of the Federal Reserve's reverse repo program. The repo is jargon for 24-hour loans between the Federal Reserve and the institutions in the program. Let's briefly go through how it works. When the Blackrock fund doesn't quite have enough cash to pay out their debts at the end of a business day, they can sell their treasury bonds for cash to the Federal Reserve. This sale will be part of an agreement to buy them back the next day at a slightly higher price once they have the cash on hand. The opposite can also occur, where the Federal Reserve can sell treasury bonds to the Blackrock fund with an agreement to buy them back at a slightly higher price the next day. There's a bunch of reasons why this odd system exists, but that's outside the scope of this video. The important thing about this mechanism though is that it will give the Federal Reserve the ability to directly print USDC with cash and bond injections from the Fed to the Blackrock fund. When regular banks use this program, the US bonds are just passive income assets that makes them money through the interest paid on these bonds. Circle and Blackrock will be different, as the bonds will sit there and generate passive income, but will also be used as a reserve asset for USDC to be created. So essentially the Fed can sell either cash or bonds to the Blackrock fund, as either way they'll be used as collateral to create another USDC dollar. The first problem I see with this is the potential for double creation of US dollars. To clarify, if the US Fed takes on debt to print money and create a treasury bond for $1, the Blackrock fund can buy this dollar and use it as collateral to create another USDC. The Fed now has a dollar it pushes into the economy, and Circle also creates a digital dollar. Both are pushed into the wider economy, essentially creating $2 of the Federal Reserve taking $1 in debt. This could be quite inflationary. The second problem I see here is the Fed has maintained its ability to infinitely print money in the form of USDC. It can retract USDC through quantitative tightening, but wouldn't expect the US Fed to employ a deflationary tactic like this. I know this is a bit complex, and I hoped I explained it well. If not, the Plain Bagel has made an awesome video on repos that might be worth a watch. Now we went through a bit, so quick recap. Governments are scared of a new digital currency emerging that they can't control. This has them rushing to create or adopt a government currency they have complete control over, in hopes that they can stop the world from adopting the uncontrolled digital currencies. The government currency must be completely controlled by the government and allow them to control supply, track their populations, and freeze assets when necessary. The simple solution of co-opting a stablecoin emerged, which would also avoid the controversy of implementing a CBDC. So US government, Federal Reserve, and Blackrock set out to do this with Circle's USDC. So, is it certain that USDC will be co-opted by the US government to serve as a CBDC? No, not 100%, but it seems to be a viable option with lots of benefits and few trade-offs compared to launching what everyone considers to be a CBDC. A lot of this will hinge on whether or not Blackrock's fund gets into the reserve repo program, which is likely, so I suggest being concerned. Something else to consider is that if it doesn't happen this way in the US, it could and probably will happen this way in either Europe or Japan, because they're the currency Circle is targeting next. Given that Circle are now backed by Blackrock, well, the sky's the limit for their potential to take over currencies. I was going to include strategies to combat CBDCs, the tactics that will be used to roll out CBDCs, and the alternative methods for launching them, but this video is long enough, and they're all enormous topics on their own. So I'll make a video about them in the near future. Otherwise, I suggest following my Twitter if you want to see things that I don't include in my videos, but people will likely want to know anyways. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.